I never thought a soccer practice could turn into a nightmare that would expose the dark side of our perfect neighborhood. But when a power-hungry HOA president blocked an ambulance from reaching my daughter, I learned that some people value rules over human life, and how quickly minutes can become the difference between life and death. "Dad, she can't breathe." The panic in my son's voice shot through the phone like electricity. "Something's wrong with Maddie." I was unpacking boxes in our new home when the call came. We'd moved to Oakwood Estates just 3 weeks ago, an upscale, gated community with manicured lawns and strict HOA regulations, the kind of place that promised safety and security. "What happened?" I demanded, already grabbing my keys. "She ate something at the team snack. She's all red and wheezing, Coach. Has her EpiPen, but I didn't hear the rest." Maddie had severe food allergies. We'd been managing them her entire 16 years, but anaphylaxis was always our nightmare scenario. "I'm calling 911, I told him. "Stay with her. Tell Coach to use the EpiPen now." My hands shook as I made this call while rushing to my car. The dispatcher's calm voice provided little comfort. "Ambulance is being dispatched to Westfield Sports Complex. ETA 6 minutes. Is the EpiPen being administered?" "Yes," I confirmed, peeling out of our driveway. "But she needs emergency care immediately. EpiPens only buy time." "Sir, please don't. Drive to the location. Meet the ambulance at your home so they can transport—" "I need to be with my daughter," I insisted. The dispatcher's voice firmed. "Sir, the ambulance will reach her faster if they don't have to search for her at a busy sports complex. They can pick her up and then collect you on the way to the hospital. This saves critical minutes." The logic cut through my panic. She was right. "Okay," I agreed, turning around. "I'll wait at home. Please hurry." I called my wife Sarah next, who was across town at a teacher conference. Her sharp intake of breath told me everything. "I'm leaving now," she said. "Did they use the EpiPen?" "Yes, but you know that only buys 15 minutes. The ambulance is coming here, then picking her." "Hup, I'll meet you at County General." I paced our front porch, watching the street, counting seconds that felt like hours. Maddie had her first severe reaction when she was 4. I still remembered the terror in her eyes as her throat began to close. We'd never taken food safety lightly since. My phone buzzed with a text from my son. "Coach used EpiPen. She's still struggling, but a little better. Where's ambulance?" I checked the time. 8 minutes had passed. "They should be arriving any moment." That's when my phone rang again. An unfamiliar number. "Hello? Sir, this is EMT Martinez with County Emergency Services. We're trying to reach your residence at Oakwood Estates, but we're being denied entry." At the gate, my blood ran cold. "What? Why? It's an emergency." "There's a woman blocking the entrance with her vehicle. She's refusing to move and insisting we need proper visitor authorization, despite our emergency lights and sirens. We've explained the situation, but she's not budging." "Is there another entrance?" "No," I said, panic rising. "There's only one way in. This is insane. My daughter is having an anaphylactic reaction." "We're aware, sir. We've contacted police for assistance, but they're still minutes out. We're trying to resolve this, but—" I was already running to my car. "I'm coming to the gate now." The drive to the community entrance took less than 2 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. As I approached, I saw the ambulance with flashing lights, siren blaring, and a silver Mercedes SUV parked diagonally across the entrance, blocking access. Beside the SUV stood a woman in her 50s with a perfectly coiffed blonde bob and an expression of stern disapproval. She was gesturing emphatically at the EMTs, who looked both desperate and furious. I recognized her immediately. Karen Wilson, HOA president, who had personally welcomed us to the neighborhood with a binder of regulations and a warning about our moving truck exceeding the permitted hours for commercial vehicles. I slammed my car into park and leaped out. "What the hell are you doing? That ambulance needs to get through now." Karen turned, clipboard clutched to her chest like armor. "Mr. Jensen, these individuals are attempting to enter Oakwood Estates. Without proper authorization, I'm simply enforcing our security protocols." "That's an ambulance," I shouted, pointing to the emergency vehicle with its lights still flashing. "They're trying to save my daughter's life." "They need to follow proper procedures," she insisted, unmoved. "Anyone could put lights on a vehicle. They need to be verified and logged in the visitor system before—" My daughter is dying. The words tore from my throat. She's having an anaphylactic reaction. Every second counts. Karen's expression didn't change. I understand you're upset, but rules exist for everyone's safety. If we make exceptions... I didn't hear the rest. My phone buzzed with a text from my son. Dad, where is help? She's getting worse. Something snapped inside me. I turned to the community security guard, who had been watching uncertainly from his booth. Either you move her car right now or I swear to God I will move it myself, I said, my voice deadly calm. The guard looked from me to Karen, then made his decision. He jogged to the Mercedes, used his override key to open it and shifted it into neutral before pushing it aside with the help of one EMT. This is outrageous, Karen protested. You have no authority to... The ambulance surged forward the moment. The path cleared, lights flashing and siren wailing as it raced into the community. I ran back to my car, heart pounding with fear and rage. As I reversed to follow the ambulance back to the sports complex, I caught sight of Karen furiously typing on her phone, her face flushed with indignation. In that moment, I didn't care about HOA politics or neighborhood drama. All that mattered was reaching Maddie in time. What I didn't know then was that this wasn't just about one emergency or one power-hungry HOA president. Karen Wilson's actions would spark a conflict that would expose the rot beneath our pristine community's surface and nearly cost my daughter her life. But right now, racing behind the ambulance, all I could think was, please let them reach her in time. Please let her be okay. Because some things are more important than rules, and some mistakes can never be forgiven. I reached the sports complex minutes after. The ambulance, tires screeching as I parked haphazardly on the grass. The scene at the field was a blur of activity, paramedics working frantically around my daughter, her teammates huddled together in frightened groups, coaches trying to maintain calm. Maddie lay on the stretcher, her face swollen and mottled, an oxygen mask covering her nose and mouth. Her eyes, wide with terror, found mine as I approached. I'm here, sweetheart, I said, grasping her hand. You're going to be okay. One of the EMTs looked up, his expression grim. Her airways compromised, BP's dropping. We need to transport. Now, what took so long? My son Dylan demanded, his teenage face streaked with tears. She kept getting worse. Someone blocked the gate, I managed, the rage I'd suppressed roaring back. The HOA president wouldn't let them through. The lead paramedic's head snapped up. We lost nearly 12 minutes. In anaphylaxis, that's... He stopped himself, focusing back on Maddie. Let's move. Dad, you can ride with us. As they loaded her into the ambulance, I turned to Dylan. Take my car, go home and wait for Mum to call. The ambulance doors closed with a decisive thud, and we sped off. No gate to block us this time. Inside, the paramedics worked with urgent precision as Maddie's breathing became more labored. The epinephrine from her EpiPen was wearing off, and the delay meant her body's reaction had progressed dangerously. Administering second epinephrine, the EMT announced, starting IV corticosteroids. I clutched the overhead rail, watching the monitors flash warning colors as my daughter's numbers deteriorated. What exactly happened at the gate? The paramedic asked, hands moving steadily despite the tension. Dispatch said someone physically blocked access. The HOA president, I explained, my voice tight. Karen Wilson. She parked her car across the entrance and demanded proper visitor authorization. Wouldn't move even after they explained it was a medical emergency. The paramedic's face darkened. We're filing a report. That's criminal obstruction of emergency services. Will Maddie be okay? It was the only question that mattered. He met my eyes briefly. The delay didn't help, but we're doing everything we can. TST class. Or later that evening, after Maddie had been stabilized in the hospital's intensive care unit, I pieced together what had happened at the gate through conversations with the EMTs, security guard, and neighbors, who had witnessed the confrontation. The ambulance had arrived at Oakwood Estates entrance at 4:17 p.m. Finding the visitors' gate closed, they'd followed protocol by activating their lights and sirens, the universal signal for emergency access. Karen had been leaving the community when she noticed the ambulance. Instead of continuing out, she'd stopped her Mercedes diagonally across. the entrance and emerged with her ever-present clipboard. She demanded to see credentials, EMT Martinez told me at the hospital. We showed our county emergency services IDs, explained it was a severe allergic reaction case. She insisted that wasn't sufficient, said we needed to be properly logged. In the visitor management system, the security guard, a recent hire named Jeff, had attempted to intervene. I tried to tell Ms. Wilson that emergency vehicles are automatically authorized, he explained, when I called him later. But she said I was new and didn't understand the full security protocols. She threatened to report me to the security company. Karen had stood her ground, even as the paramedics explained that minutes could mean the difference between life and death. She'd cited multiple security incidents involving fake emergency vehicles in other communities, incidents that I would later discover were entirely fabricated. By the time I arrived and the security guard finally acted, 11 minutes and 43 seconds had elapsed since the ambulance's arrival at the gate. I've been an EMT for 12 years, Martinez told me, his professional composure cracking. I've never been blocked from reaching a patient before. Never. Sarah arrived. At the hospital just after 5 p.m., her face ashen with fear. I met her in the ICU waiting room, the weight of what had happened settling on me like concrete. "How is she?" were her first words. "Stable for now. The doctor says the next few hours are critical." I guided her to a chair. "Sarah, there's something you need to know." Her eyes never left mine as I explained about the ambulance, the gate, and Karen. With each detail, her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to cold fury. "She did what?" Sarah's voice was dangerously quiet. "She blocked an ambulance that was trying to reach our daughter?" "The doctors say the delay significantly worsened Maddie's condition," I confirmed. "Her second exposure was severe to begin with, but those lost minutes meant that woman nearly killed our daughter." Sarah's hands trembled. "Over visitor protocols." Before I could answer, the ICU doctor approached. Dr. Patel, a composed woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "Mr. and Mrs. Jensen, Maddie is responding well to treatment. The next 24 hours are critical, but I'm cautiously optimistic." Relief swept through me so powerfully I had to grip the chair. "Was the delay in treatment significant?" Sarah asked directly. Doctor Patel didn't sugarcoat her response. "In anaphylaxis, we talk about the golden window, the critical time when intervention is most effective. Your daughter's condition deteriorated substantially during the reported delay. The second dose of epinephrine should have been administered sooner." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I understand there was an issue with ambulance access. We're documenting the timeline in her medical record. Any delay in emergency medical services is a serious concern." After she left, Sarah and I sat in silence, holding hands, the weight of what might have happened, what still might happen, hanging over us. My phone buzzed with a text from Dylan. "Dad, there's HOA people at our house. They say we violated some rule when the security guard moved Karen's car. What should I do?" I stared at the screen in disbelief. Our daughter was fighting for her life in the ICU, and Karen Wilson was already launching her counterattack. "Tell them we're at the hospital with Maddie, and they can take their violation notice and shove it," I typed back, then deleted it, taking a deep breath. "Don't answer the door," I wrote instead. "We'll handle it when we get home." Sarah read the message, over my shoulder. "This isn't over, is it?" "No," I said grimly, "but neither are we." The ICU waiting room became our second home over the next 24 hours. Sarah and I took turns sitting with Maddie, whose condition had stabilized but remained serious. The sterile hospital environment, with its antiseptic smell and fluorescent lighting, seemed to exist in a different universe from the manicured lawns and pristine facades of Oakwood Estates. During my 3 a.m. vigil at Maddie's bedside, I studied my daughter's face. Even with the swelling from her reaction, I could see traces of the toddler who once chased butterflies in our old backyard, the third grader who'd learned to read her food labels with fierce independence, the teenager who'd never let her allergies define her limits. The steady beep of her monitors provided a rhythm to my thoughts, which kept circling back to one devastating truth. This didn't have to happen. "Mr. Jensen?" A nurse appeared in the doorway. There's someone here from emergency services. In the hallway stood EMT Martinez, still in uniform, looking as though he hadn't slept. I just finished my shift, he explained. Wanted to check on your daughter. She's stable, I told him. The doctors are cautiously optimistic. Martinez nodded, relief briefly crossing his face before his expression turned serious. I filed the official incident report about what happened at the gate. My supervisor wants to know if you'll provide a statement. Absolutely, I said without hesitation. Good. Because what happened wasn't just wrong, it was illegal. His voice tightened. Interfering with emergency medical services is a criminal offense. There are state laws specifically protecting access for emergency vehicles. Will anything actually come of it? I asked, the cynicism of the past hours creeping into my voice. That depends on how much noise you make, he replied candidly. But you should know. We have dashcam footage from the ambulance. It recorded the entire incident at the gate, with timestamps. Clear audio too. My exhausted brain suddenly sharpened. Can I get a copy of that footage? I'll see what I can do, he promised. And just so you know, the hospital has security cameras at the emergency entrance. They'll show exactly when we arrived with your daughter. Between those two timestamps, is the delay that... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. By morning, Maddie had improved enough to have her breathing tube removed. Her first raspy words were, "Did we win the game?" Sarah laughed through her tears, smoothing our daughter's hair back. No soccer talk, just rest. While Maddie drifted back to sleep, Dr. Patel updated us on her condition. The next 48 hours are crucial for monitoring secondary reactions, but I'm increasingly confident about her recovery. She hesitated, then added, I understand there were unusual circumstances with the emergency response. The HOA president physically blocked the ambulance from reaching our daughter, Sarah stated flatly. 12 minutes that nearly cost Maddie her life. Dr. Patel's professional demeanor slipped momentarily, revealing genuine shock. I've never heard of such a thing. From a medical perspective, that delay significantly exacerbated her condition. She made a note in Maddie's chart. I'm documenting this fully. You may need it. After she left, Sarah turned to me, her expression hardening into something I'd rarely seen in our 15 years of marriage. I want that woman held accountable. Michael, I don't care what it takes. We will, I promised. But first, let's focus on getting Maddie home. My phone buzzed with a text from Dylan. Dad, the neighbors are asking about Maddie. Also, there's a violation notice taped to our door about unauthorized vehicle movement within community property and interfering with HOA official duties. Fine is $500. Sarah read the message over my shoulder and made a sound between a laugh and a snarl. They can't be serious. Before I could respond, the hospital room door opened. A tall, distinguished man in his 60s entered, followed by a woman about the same age. I recognized them immediately. Richard Winters, the HOA board vice president, and his wife Eleanor. Mr. and Mrs. Jensen, Richard began, his voice carefully modulated. We heard about your daughter. The community is very concerned. Are you? I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Eleanor stepped forward, clutching a small gift bag. We brought something for Madison, from the board. She placed it on the side table, then added, What happened yesterday was unfortunate. Unfortunate? Sarah repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. Your HOA president blocked an ambulance that was trying to reach our dying daughter. The doctor says those lost minutes significantly worsened her condition. And you call that unfortunate? Richard cleared his throat. There seems to be some misunderstanding about the protocols. There's no misunderstanding, I interrupted. Your HOA president decided that her clipboard and visitor log were more important than my daughter's life. That's not a misunderstanding. That's criminal negligence. We should discuss this at the appropriate time, Richard suggested, glancing uncomfortably at Maddie's sleeping form. Perhaps at the next board meeting. Oh, we'll discuss it, Sarah assured him, her voice vibrating with controlled fury. We'll discuss it with the board, with emergency services, with the county prosecutor if necessary. Your power-drunk HOA president nearly killed our daughter, and someone left a $500 violation notice on our door while we're sitting in the ICU. Eleanor's eyes widened. A violation notice? That must be a mistake. The only mistake, I said, standing to signal the end of their visit, was thinking that Oakwood Estates valued human life over its precious rulebook. After they left, Sarah and I exchanged a look that needed no words. The battle lines had been drawn. That afternoon, as Maddie continued to improve, my phone rang with an unknown number. It was Jeff, the security guard from the gate. "Mr. Jensen, I heard your daughter's doing better." "That's good." He paused. "Listen, I'm probably going to lose my job for this, but you should know, this isn't the first time Ms. Wilson has blocked emergency vehicles. Last year there was an incident with a fire truck responding to a kitchen fire, and 3 months ago, a private ambulance for Mr. Garza's heart problem." "Were these incidents reported?" I asked, grabbing a pen. "Supposedly. But they never went anywhere." His voice lowered. "If you're going to fight this, I have documentation, incident logs that never made it to the board. I kept copies because, well, I knew something worse would happen eventually." As I hung up, a text arrived from EMT Martinez. "Got approval for footage release. We'll need you to sign some forms. This isn't right and we're not letting it slide." I looked at Maddie, sleeping peacefully now, her vitals steadily improving. Then at Sarah, her exhausted determination matching my own. "It's time to fight back," I said quietly. Sarah nodded. "For Maddie, and for whoever might be next." The news about Karen blocking the ambulance spread through Oakwood Estates like wildfire, igniting reactions that revealed the true character of our community. By the time we brought Maddie home from the hospital 3 days later, battle lines had been clearly drawn. As I helped my still weak daughter from the car, I noticed neighbors watching from windows and porches. Some waved supportively, others quickly retreated behind closed doors. Oakwood Estates had become a neighborhood divided. "What's with all the flowers?" Maddie asked, noticing the collection of bouquets, cards, and gift baskets on our porch. "People heard what happened," I explained simply, not wanting to burden her with the full situation yet. "They were worried about you." Dylan met us at the door. "Dad, there's like 50 messages on the community forum about what happened. It's gotten pretty intense." Inside, as Sarah helped Maddie settle on the couch, I logged onto the neighborhood's online forum. The normally quiet message board had exploded with activity. "Prayers for the Jensen girl. What happened at the gate is inexcusable. Let's not rush to judgment until we hear both sides. Karen has kept our community safe for years. Safety means letting ambulances through the gate, period. Rules exist for a reason. Proper procedures should be followed by everyone." The debate raged, post after post revealing a community grappling with what had happened and what it meant for all of us. My doorbell rang just as I finished reading. Outside stood Maria Rodriguez, whose family lived 3 doors down. "I made enchiladas," she said, holding out a covered dish. "My son has a peanut allergy, so I understand." Her expression hardened. What Karen did was unforgivable. "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched. "Would you like to come in?" Over the next hour, a steady stream of neighbors stopped by. The Peterson family brought homework Maddie had missed. The elderly Goldsteins delivered homemade chicken soup. Each expressed variations of the same sentiment. What happened was wrong, inexcusable, dangerous, but not everyone felt that way. As the Goldsteins were leaving, I noticed Linda Blackwell watching from across the street, phone to her ear, clearly, reporting on the activity at our house. Linda was Karen's closest ally on the board and her friend of 20 years. "The Whisper campaign has already started," said Tom Kelly, a neighbor I'd barely spoken to before today. He'd arrived with his wife and a grocery store bakery cake. "Karen's telling everyone you endangered the community by authorizing unvetted personnel to move her car." "That's ridiculous," Sarah said, joining us at the door. "Of course it is," Tom agreed. "But Karen's narrative is that you broke community rules and threatened her, and she was just doing her job by following security protocols." "She blocked an ambulance that was trying to save my daughter," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "We know," Tom's wife Amanda interjected, "and more people support you than you realize, but they're scared to speak publicly. Karen has ways of making life difficult for those who cross her." That evening, as Maddie rested upstairs, Dylan showed us what he'd discovered on social media. "Karen's daughter posted this on the community Facebook page," he said, turning his laptop toward us. The post was a carefully crafted statement expressing deep concern about misinformation being spread and emphasizing the critical importance of proper security protocols even during emergencies. It claimed Karen had delayed the ambulance less than 2 minutes while verifying credentials and suggested our family was exaggerating the situation for personal grievances against the HOA. "Less than 2 minutes?" Sarah repeated incredulously. "We have time-stamped footage showing nearly 12 minutes. They're getting ahead of the story," I realized. Controlling the narrative. A knock at the door interrupted us. It was Jeff, the security guard, still in uniform but clearly off duty. "I need to talk to you," he said nervously. "I don't have much time." Inside, he spoke quietly and quickly. "I've been called in for a performance review tomorrow. They're going to fire me for moving Karen's car." "They can't do that," Sarah protested. "You were facilitating emergency services. They're saying I violated protocol and damaged private property." He ran a hand through his hair. "I can't lose. This job, Mr. Jensen. My wife's pregnant and our insurance will help," I promised. "I have a friend who's an employment attorney, and we'll testify about what happened." After Jeff left, the doorbell rang again. This time it was a courier delivering a large envelope, official notice of HOA violations and hearing. Inside was a formal complaint, meticulously documented in Karen's handwriting, citing us for unauthorized direction of security personnel, damage to private property, a scratched bumper on her Mercedes, creating a hostile environment for an HOA officer, spreading defamatory statements about board activities. A hearing was scheduled for next week to determine penalties, which could include fines up to $1,000 and potential review of community membership. "They're threatening to throw us out of the neighborhood," Sarah said in disbelief. Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Jensen, this is Rebecca Torres from Channel 7 News. We've received reports about an incident where an HOA president blocked an ambulance from reaching your daughter during a medical emergency. Would you be willing to comment?" I looked at Sarah, who nodded firmly. "Yes," I told the reporter. "We have the whole thing on video." That night, as we checked on Maddie before bed, she asked the question we'd been dreading. "Dad, did someone really try to stop the ambulance from helping me?" I sat on the edge of her bed, choosing my words carefully. "Yes, honey. The HOA president thought the ambulance needed to follow visitor check-in procedures first." Maddie was quiet for a moment. "The paramedic told me I almost died," she finally said. "If they'd been even a few minutes later," I took her hand, my heart breaking at the fear in her eyes. "We're making sure this never happens again to anyone. I promise." As I turned out her light, my resolve hardened. This wasn't just about one incident anymore. It was about a community where power had corrupted, where rules had become more important than people, where fear had silenced too many for too long, and it was time for that to change. The morning after the news station contacted me, I took a personal day from work. With Maddie recovering upstairs and Sarah returning to her teaching job after days of emergency leave, I converted our dining room into an investigation headquarters. My corporate law background had taught me one essential truth: documentation wins cases. And if this was going to become the legal battle it appeared to be, I needed more than righteous anger. I needed evidence. I started by organizing what we already had: the ambulance dashcam footage, which EMT Martinez had delivered that morning, hospital records noting the critical delay, and statements from witnesses at the gate. But I knew from experience that isolated incidents rarely tell the complete story. "Mr. Jensen?" A voice called from the front door, followed by a gentle knock. "It's Rose Hernandez from 1422 Oakwood Circle." I opened the door to find an elderly woman I recognized from community gatherings, but had never actually spoken with. "I heard about your daughter," she said, her accent thickening with emotion. "I'm so sorry. That woman, this isn't the first time." Rose had lived in Oakwood Estates for 15 years, longer than Karen's 12-year reign as HOA president. Once seated at my dining room table, she shared a story that confirmed my growing suspicions. 3 years ago, my husband had a stroke. The ambulance came, but Karen delayed them at the gate, insisting they needed to be logged into the visitor system first. Her eyes glistened. By the time they reached Roberto, precious minutes were lost. The doctors said, They said earlier intervention might have prevented some of the brain damage. Did you report this? I asked gently. To the board, yes. Karen said they would review gate procedures, but nothing changed. Many families here are afraid to challenge. She has ways of making life difficult, violations, fines, social exclusion. After Rose left, promising to provide a written statement, my phone rang. It was Jeff, the security guard. They fired me, he said, his voice flat. Claimed I violated security protocols and endangered the community. We'll fight this, I assured him. What about those other incidents you mentioned? I've got everything, security logs, incident reports, my personnel notes. I even have emails where I raised concerns about emergency vehicle protocols and was told to follow the established chain of command. Can you send me copies? Already on my way over. By midday, my dining room table was covered with evidence. Jeff's documents revealed a disturbing pattern. 5 separate incidents over 3 years where emergency vehicles had been delayed at the gate. Each time, Karen was coincidentally on site and insistent on proper protocols. Each time, concerns were documented but ultimately dismissed. More shocking were the HOA financial records Jeff had accessed before his termination. 3 years ago, Oakwood Estates had contracted with premium security solutions for our gate security system, a sophisticated setup with cameras, electronic logs, and remote access capabilities. The system had cost the community over $300,000. Look who owns premium security solutions, Jeff said, pointing to the corporate registration documents. My eyes widened. Wilson Security Holdings, LLC. Karen's husband. The board never disclosed the connection during the bidding process, Jeff explained. Most residents have no idea they're paying premium rates to Karen's family business. I was still processing this information when my phone rang again. Another neighbor I barely knew, then another, each with their own Karen story. By late afternoon, my investigation had expanded to include financial improprieties, selective rule enforcement, and a systematic pattern of intimidation. The doorbell rang just after 4 p.m. I opened it to find a professional-looking woman in a fire department uniform. Mr. Jensen, I'm Battalion Chief Diana Rivera, County Fire Marshal's office. May I come in? Inside, she explained her presence. We received an anonymous tip about emergency access issues at Oakwood Estates. Given the serious nature of the allegations, I pulled our inspection records. She opened a folder on the table. 3 years ago, we cited Oakwood Estates for inadequate emergency vehicle access protocols. The HOA was required to implement specific changes, including immediate access for emergency vehicles, without verification procedures. Were those changes made? I asked. According to their submitted compliance report, yes. But based on what happened to your daughter? She frowned. We're initiating a formal investigation. Falsifying compliance reports is a serious offense. After Chief Rivera left, promising to keep me updated, I reviewed everything we'd gathered. The picture emerging was far more troubling than one isolated incident. Karen Wilson hadn't just blocked an ambulance in a moment of poor judgment. She'd systematically undermined emergency access protocols while enriching her family through security contracts. My investigation was interrupted by the sound of a news broadcast from the living room, where Dylan was watching TV. Breaking news tonight, the anchor announced. Disturbing footage has emerged, showing an HOA president blocking an ambulance from reaching a teenage girl suffering a life-threatening allergic reaction. The screen showed the dashcam footage from the ambulance, capturing Karen's obstruction in damning detail. The timestamp in the corner clearly showed the 12-minute delay. Channel 7. News has learned this may not be an isolated incident, the reporter continued. Sources suggest a pattern of emergency vehicle obstruction at the exclusive Oakwood Estates community. The County Fire Marshal's office has confirmed they're launching an investigation. My phone immediately lit up with calls and texts, neighbors, friends, reporters seeking comment. Among them was a message from Richard Winters, the HOA vice president. Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow. This situation has escalated beyond our control. Another text followed immediately after, this one from an unknown number. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Drop this now or you'll regret it. Karen has friends in high places. I took a screenshot of the threat and added it to my growing file of evidence. The investigation had clearly touched a nerve, which told me we were on the right track. As I checked on Maddie that evening, finding her asleep with color finally returning to her face, I realized this had become about much more than one ambulance or one family. It was about a system that had prioritized power and profit over people's lives, and we were just getting started. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. in the Oakwood Estates clubhouse. By 6:30, the parking lot was already overflowing, with residents spilling onto the manicured lawn outside. Word had spread rapidly after the news broadcast, and it seemed the entire community had turned out. Sarah and I arrived together, having arranged for Dylan to stay home with Maddie. As we approached the entrance, neighbors parted to let us through, some offering quiet words of support, others averting their eyes. The division in the community was palpable. Inside, the usual orderly rows of chairs had been supplemented with extras, yet people still stood along the walls. At the front table sat the remaining board members, Richard Winters, Vice President, Eleanor Winters, Linda Blackwell, and George Porter. Karen's seat remained conspicuously empty. "Where's Karen?" someone called out, as Richard attempted to bring the meeting to order. "Ms. Wilson is unable to attend tonight due to," Richard began. "Due to being exposed on the news," another voice interrupted, triggering a wave of uncomfortable laughter. Richard's face tightened. "Let's maintain decorum, please. This is a difficult situation for everyone. Especially for the Jensen family." Rose Hernandez stood up from her seat. Their daughter almost died because Karen blocked an ambulance. Applause erupted from many in the crowd, while others shifted uncomfortably or scowled in disapproval. Richard raised his hands. "For quiet. We're here tonight to address community concerns about emergency vehicle access procedures and to clarify the board's position." Linda Blackwell leaned forward. "First, we want to express our sincere concern for Madison Jensen's health and well-being. What happened was unfortunate." "Unfortunate." Sarah's voice cut through the room like a blade. "My daughter could have died. The medical records confirm that the 12-minute delay significantly worsened her condition." "No one is disputing that a delay occurred," Richard interjected smoothly. "However, there are protocols in place for community security that must be—" "Actually, we are disputing that." I stood up, holding a folder. "I have here the county fire marshal's citation from 3 years ago requiring Oakwood Estates to provide immediate access to emergency vehicles without verification procedures. The HOA submitted compliance documents claiming these changes were implemented. They clearly were not." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Richard glanced at Linda, their momentary panic visible before they regained composure. "Those protocols have certain interpretations," George Porter offered weakly. "There's no interpretation needed for immediate access," I countered. "And while we're discussing protocols, perhaps we should address the undisclosed conflict. Show of interest regarding premium security solutions." The room went suddenly quiet. Richard's expression froze. "For those unaware," I continued, "our community paid over $300,000 for a security system from a company owned by Karen Wilson's husband. A fact never disclosed during the bidding process." Gasps and exclamations rippled through the crowd. This was clearly news to most residents. Linda Blackwell recovered first. "That allegation is both false and defamatory. The board conducted a thorough—" "I have the corporate registration documents right here," I interrupted, holding up the papers Jeff had provided, "along with the HOA financial records showing payments to premium security solutions. Would you like to revise your statement before claiming anything else that can be disproven with public records?" For the first time, the board members looked truly rattled. Richard cleared his throat. "These are serious allegations that warrant investigation. However, tonight's meeting is specifically about emergency access protocols, which have been ignored for years," called out Tom Kelly. "How many other emergencies were delayed before the Jensens? Show of hands. Who else has experienced emergency vehicle delays at our gate?" At least 8 people raised their hands, including Rose Hernandez. "This here's outrageous." Richard declared, attempting to regain control. "We're devolving into baseless accusations. With all due respect, Mr. Winters," came a new voice from the back, "there's nothing baseless about what happened." The crowd parted to reveal Battalion Chief Rivera in full uniform, flanked by 2 officers. "I'm here representing the County Fire Marshal's office. Based on evidence we've gathered, including security logs and witness statements, we're issuing an immediate citation to Oakwood Estates HOA for non-compliance with emergency access requirements." She approached the board table, placing an official document before them. "Additionally, we're investigating potential falsification of compliance reports submitted after our previous citation. This is a serious matter that could result in significant penalties." The meeting erupted into chaos, accusations flying, people talking over each other, the board members huddling in urgent consultation. Amid the disorder, my phone buzzed with a text from Dylan. "Dad, someone's at our house taking pictures of our yard and Maddie's medical equipment." My blood ran cold. I showed Sarah the message. "Go," she said immediately. "I'll stay here." I slipped out as Richard futilely banged his gavel, trying to restore order. The short drive home felt endless, my mind racing with possibilities, reporters, curious neighbors, or something more sinister. As I turned onto our street, I spotted a figure darting away from our front yard. Linda Blackwell, Karen's closest ally, camera in hand. She hurried to her car parked halfway down the block. Dylan met me at the door, his teenage face tight with worry. She was taking pictures of Maddie's oxygen tank on the porch and measuring our grass with a ruler. Inside, I found a violation. Notice already slipped under our door. Unapproved medical equipment visible from street, and lawn exceeding maximum permitted height, 3.5 inches. The fine listed was $750. Fury rose in me like a tide. Using my daughter's life-saving medical equipment as grounds for an HOA violation was beyond petty. It was cruel, vindictive, and potentially dangerous if it forced us to move equipment indoors. My phone rang, Sarah calling from the meeting, which had apparently devolved further after Chief Rivera's announcement. "Michael, they're trying to call an executive session to exclude residents," she reported. "But half the board is now insisting on Karen's resignation before they'll proceed with anything. It's chaos." As we spoke, my email pinged with a message from Richard Winters, subject line, "Urgent Resolution Proposal." The message was brief. "This situation has escalated unnecessarily. The board is prepared to dismiss all pending violations against your family and establish new emergency access protocols in exchange for your agreement not to pursue legal action or speak further with media. Please advise your willingness to discuss." I stared at the screen, their desperation now obvious. The dashcam footage, the fire marshal's investigation, the financial connections. They were scrambling to contain the damage. "They're offering a deal," I told Sarah. "They want us to drop everything in exchange for dismissing our violations." Her response was immediate. "Not a chance." As I ended the call, another text arrived, this one from Jeff. "Check your email. Just sent you Karen's internal messages to security staff from the past year. She specifically instructed us to delay emergency vehicles for proper verification, regardless of circumstances. She knew exactly what she was doing." The escalation had begun, but not in the way Karen and her allies had anticipated. Their system of fear and control was collapsing, exposed to the light they'd worked so hard to avoid, and we were just getting started. The morning after the chaotic board meeting, I awoke to the sound of voices outside our home. Peering through the blinds, I spotted a local news van parked across the street, a reporter preparing for a live broadcast. My phone showed 17 missed calls, mostly from unknown numbers, and dozens of text messages from neighbors. "Dad, we're trending," Dylan announced, holding up his phone to show me a social media hashtag, "HOA blocks ambulance." The dashcam footage had gone viral overnight, spreading far beyond our local news. National outlets had picked up the story, framing it as a cautionary tale about HOA overreach. Comments poured in from across the country, many sharing their own HOA horror stories. "This isn't just about us anymore," I realized aloud. Sarah nodded, scrolling through her own phone. The county supervisor just issued a statement calling for an investigation into emergency access protocols for all gated communities. Michael, this is becoming a policy issue. The pressure on Oakwood Estates intensified throughout the day. County officials announced a formal review of all HOA emergency procedures within their jurisdiction. The fire marshal's office expanded their investigation to include potential criminal charges for falsifying compliance documents. Local EMTs organized a protest at the community gates, carrying signs reading, "Seconds count" and "Lives over rules." By noon, my email inbox had collapsed under the weight of messages, from reporters seeking comments, neighbors offering support, attorneys proposing representation, and even reality TV producers interested in our story. Among them was an unexpected message from George Porter, one of the board members. "Mr. Jensen, I can no longer remain silent. The enclosed documents show Karen has been systematically manipulating HOA finances and procedures for years. Some of us on the board were kept in the dark. Others were complicit. I'm resigning effective immediately and will cooperate with any investigation. I'm sorry for what happened to your daughter." Attached were internal emails and financial records that exceeded even our existing evidence, documentation of selective enforcement against problem residents, financial transactions benefiting board members' businesses, and most damning of all, an email chain specifically discussing how to maintain verification procedures for emergency vehicles, despite the fire marshal's requirements. As I studied these documents, Battalion Chief Rivera arrived, accompanied by 2 county officials. "Mr. Jensen, we're conducting a formal site inspection of Oakwood Estates' emergency access systems," she explained. "Given your experience, we'd like you to participate." At the community gates, we found a scene of confrontation. A group of residents had gathered, many wearing hastily made red armbands symbolizing support for emergency access. Opposing them stood a smaller contingent of Karen's supporters, including Linda Blackwell, who was filming everything with her ever-present phone. "This is private property," Linda shouted, as Chief Rivera's team began examining the gate mechanisms. "You have no right to inspect without board approval." "Actually, we have every right," countered one of the county officials, producing official documentation. Emergency services access points fall under county jurisdiction regardless of private property status. As the inspection proceeded, revealing multiple violations of safety codes, residents began sharing their own emergency delay stories with the officials. What had started as one family's nightmare was revealing a systemic problem affecting the entire community. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Turn on Channel 7 now." I borrowed a neighbor's phone to stream the broadcast. There on screen was Karen Wilson herself, immaculately dressed and composed, giving her first public statement. "As president of Oakwood Estates HOA, I have always prioritized our community's safety and security. The unfortunate incident with the Jensen family has been grossly mischaracterized. I was simply following established protocols to verify credentials, a process that took only a few minutes. Any claims of extended delays are simply not accurate." The reporter interrupted, "But the ambulance dashcam footage clearly shows a 12-minute delay with timestamp verification." Karen's practiced smile faltered momentarily. "Those timestamps are being investigated for accuracy. What the public doesn't understand is that we've had incidents of security breaches in gated communities using emergency vehicles as cover. Can you provide any documentation of these incidents?" Karen's smile tightened further. "That information is confidential for security reasons. The bottom line is that protocols exist to protect our residents, and as president, I cannot make exceptions that might endanger the community." "Even when a child's life is at stake?" Before Karen could respond, the broadcast cut to a new voice, Dr. Patel from the hospital. "Speaking purely from a medical perspective," she stated firmly, "the 12-minute delay in treatment significantly worsened Madison Jensen's condition. In anaphylaxis cases, every minute counts. There is absolutely no security protocol that should ever take precedence over emergency medical access." The public reaction was swift and devastating. Comments flooded social media condemning Karen's position. Local officials issued statements distancing themselves from her views. Even the National HOA Association released a statement affirming that emergency medical access must always take absolute priority over any verification procedures. By evening, the pressure had intensified further. The county supervisor announced emergency hearings on gated community access. 3 more Oakwood Estates board members resigned. A petition demanding Karen's immediate removal as HOA president gathered signatures from over 70% of community residents in just hours. Through it all, Maddie remained our primary concern. The media attention and community conflict had taken a toll on her recovery. She'd begun having nightmares about not being able to breathe, of help being kept away by faceless figures with clipboards. I don't understand why anyone would stop. An ambulance, she told me that night as I sat on the edge of her bed, even if they thought they were following rules. Some people get so focused on rules that they forget what the rules are supposed to protect, I tried to explain. But what's happening now might help make sure this never happens to anyone else. After she fell asleep, I joined Sarah in the living room, where she was reviewing the growing evidence file. The county prosecutor called, she said quietly. They're considering criminal charges against Karen for obstruction of emergency services. Good, I said, the word coming out more forcefully than I intended. Sarah looked up at me. This isn't just about accountability anymore, is it? It's about changing a system that puts rules above people's lives. She was right. What had begun, as one family's fight for justice, had evolved into something larger. A fundamental questioning of power structures that prioritize control over compassion, protocols over people, rules over reason. The public pressure wasn't just on Karen Wilson anymore. It was on a broken system that had allowed someone like her to gamble with a child's life in the name of community standards. And day by day, that pressure was building towards something that would change Oakwood Estates forever. The certified letter arrived exactly 14 days after the incident at the gate. Heavy cream-colored stationery with embossed letterhead from Caldwell Morrison Fairchild LLP, one of the most expensive law firms in the county. Mr. and Mrs. Jensen, it began, with cold formality. This firm represents Ms. Karen Wilson in all matters related to recent events at Oakwood Estates. Our client has suffered substantial damages due to your defamatory statements, unauthorized distribution of security footage, and deliberate efforts to damage her professional reputation. The letter demanded we immediately cease all disparaging communications, remove all social media posts related to the incident, and provide a public retraction of our false claims regarding Ms. Wilson's actions. Failure to comply within 48 hours will result in the filing of a defamation lawsuit seeking damages in excess of $1.5 million. It concluded. Sarah looked up from the letter, her expression a mixture of disbelief and anger. She's suing us, after what she did to Maddie. It's intimidation, I explained, recognizing the tactic from my corporate law days. She's trying to frighten us into silence. My assessment was confirmed the following morning when similar letters arrived at the homes of 5 other outspoken residents, including Rose Hernandez and Tom Kelly. Karen was attempting to quash community opposition through legal threats. I called Alex Murray, a litigation attorney I knew from law school who specialized in SLAP cases, strategic lawsuits against public participation. This is textbook intimidation, Alex confirmed after reviewing the letter. She can't possibly win a defamation case when you have video evidence proving your statements are true, but she can make the process expensive and stressful enough that most people would back down. We're not backing down, Sarah said firmly. Alex smiled. I was hoping you'd say that because we're not just going to defend, we're going to counterattack. Within 24 hours, Alex had prepared a comprehensive response to Karen's legal threat, along with our own counterclaim for intentional infliction of emotional distress, obstruction of emergency services, and reckless endangerment. We've also prepared an emergency injunction, Alex explained, preventing any modification to the gate access systems until the case is resolved, and we're filing a formal complaint with the State Bar Association regarding their attorney's involvement in what appears to be a frivolous lawsuit intended solely for harassment. The morning our counterclaim was filed, I received a call from Richard Winters, The acting HOA president following the wave of resignations. Jensen, he began without preamble, this has gone too far. The board wants to resolve this matter before it bankrupts the community. Our insurance company is threatening to cancel our coverage over this mess. That sounds like a Karen problem, not a Jensen problem, I replied. Be reasonable, he pleaded. Karen acted as an individual, not on board. Instructions. The HOA shouldn't be punished for her actions. Yet your board supported her for years, ignored previous incidents, and is still trying to enforce her retaliatory violations against my family, I pointed out. You can't separate yourselves from her actions now that they've become a liability. Later, that day, our lawsuit expanded to include not just Karen but the HOA itself, the security company, and board members who had approved the non-compliant gate procedures. The legal battle was fully joined. What followed was 3 weeks of intense legal maneuvering. Karen's high-priced attorneys filed motions to dismiss, motions for gag orders, and motions to exclude the dashcam footage as obtained without proper authorization. Our team countered each move, while the local media covered every development. The first major turning point came during Karen's deposition. Alex had prepared meticulously, laying a careful foundation before springing the trap. Ms. Wilson, he began casually, you've stated repeatedly that your actions at the gate were simply following established security protocols, correct? Yes, Karen replied confidently. Our community guidelines require verification of all visitors, including emergency services. And who established those protocols? The board approved them based on security consultant recommendations. Alex nodded, then slid a document across the table. This is the county fire marshal's citation from 3 years ago, requiring immediate access for emergency vehicles without verification procedures. Are you familiar with this document? Karen glanced at her attorney, who nodded slightly. Yes, but those requirements were incorporated into our protocols while maintaining necessary security measures. I see. And this document, Alex continued, producing another paper, is the compliance report submitted to the fire marshal's office, stating that Oakwood Estates had implemented immediate access for emergency vehicles. Who prepared this report? Karen shifted uncomfortably. It was a board responsibility. I may have reviewed it. Alex's expression remained neutral as he placed a third document on the table. This is an email from you to the security company, dated 1 week after submitting that compliance report. In it, you specifically instruct security personnel to continue requiring verification, regardless of vehicle type or claimed emergency status. Can you explain why you issued instructions that directly contradicted what you had just certified? To county officials? The color drained from Karen's face. Her attorney called for a break, but the damage was done. The deposition had revealed not just negligence, but willful disregard for safety requirements and potential falsification of official documents. The second breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Howard Wilson, Karen's husband, contacted Alex privately. I can't support what Karen did, he confessed during a confidential meeting. We've been separated for months, though we've kept it quiet. I had no idea she was still using my company for her agenda at Oakwood Estates. Howard provided documentation showing Karen had pressured him to inflate security system costs, with the excess being channeled back to her through consulting fees. This wasn't just HOA overreach anymore. It was potential fraud. As the legal battle intensified, so did community division. Karen's supporters, though dwindling, became more aggressive, leaving anonymous notes on our supporters' doors, filing retaliatory HOA complaints, and even vandalizing Tom Kelly's car after he organized a community safety meeting. The pressure took its toll on our family. Dylan faced ostracism from friends whose parents sided with Karen. Maddie's recovery was slowed by stress and anxiety. Sarah and I spent countless hours with attorneys, investigators, and county officials instead of focusing on our daughter's health. But just as it seemed the legal war might drag on indefinitely, Karen made a critical mistake. Frustrated by the mounting evidence against her and the community's increasing hostility, she gave an unauthorized interview to a sympathetic blogger. These people don't understand what it takes to maintain standards, she declared, her carefully crafted public persona finally cracking. Sometimes hard decisions have to be made. If the ambulance had proper identification, there wouldn't have been any issue. Yes, it's unfortunate the Jensen girl had an allergic reaction, but one incident doesn't justify dismantling our entire security system. When asked directly if she regretted her actions, Karen's response was damning. I regret that people don't appreciate the importance of proper protocols. In a similar situation, I would follow the same procedures. Rules exist for a reason. The interview, quickly picked up by mainstream media, was the final blow to Karen's already crumbling defense. Even her most loyal supporters couldn't justify such callous disregard for a child's life. 2 days later, Karen's attorneys contacted Alex with a settlement offer. She would resign from the HOA permanently, withdraw all pending violations against community members, and issue a public apology. In exchange, we would drop our personal claims against her, though not against the HOA itself. It's not enough, Sarah said immediately when we discussed the offer. There's no accountability, no guarantee this won't happen to someone else. I agreed. Our counteroffer was firm. Karen would resign, admit wrongdoing in a public statement drafted by our attorneys, pay for Maddie's medical expenses, and participate in the county's development of new emergency access regulations for all gated communities. After 48 tense hours, Karen's team accepted with one modification. She would provide a written statement rather than a public appearance. As we signed the settlement documents, Alex smiled. This is just the beginning. The HOA case continues, and the county prosecutor is still considering criminal charges. That evening, as our family ate dinner together for the first time in weeks without legal documents spread across the table, Maddie asked the question that had been on all our minds. Is it really over? With Karen, I mean? I considered my answer. Carefully, one battle is over, but the fight to make sure this never happens again, that's just beginning. The next morning, Karen's statement was released to the media. I acknowledged that my actions at the Oakwood Estates gate delayed emergency medical treatment for Madison Jensen. While I believed I was following security protocols, I recognize now that no procedure should take precedence over emergency medical access. I deeply regret the consequences of my decisions and am cooperating with county officials to develop improved emergency access standards for all communities. It wasn't the full accountability we'd hoped for, but it was a public admission that would help change the system that had enabled her in the first place. And sometimes that's how justice begins, not with complete victory, but with the first. Acknowledgement of wrong. Karen's resignation created a power vacuum in Oakwood Estates. The remaining board members, most of whom had enabled her reign for years, found themselves facing a community that had awakened to its own power and was demanding accountability. The HOA's insurance company delivered the first blow. After reviewing our case documentation and Karen's public statement, they sent a letter that sent shockwaves through the board. After careful review of recent events at Oakwood Estates, it read, "We must inform you that your policy contains exclusions for willful negligence and failure to comply with safety regulations. As such, we are denying coverage for claims related to the Jensen incident and placing your community on probationary status pending implementation of required safety measures." In practical terms, this meant the HOA itself and potentially individual board members would be personally liable for any damages awarded in our ongoing lawsuit. The financial implications were staggering. Richard Winters called an emergency board meeting that evening, which I attended along with Alex and nearly 100 residents. The atmosphere was tense as Richard outlined the insurance company's position. To be blunt, he concluded, the HOA faces potential bankruptcy if this case proceeds to trial. We need to consider all options for resolution, including personal liability for board members, Alex added helpfully from his seat beside me. Many states allow for individual liability when board members knowingly violated safety regulations. The color drained from several faces on the dais. Linda Blackwell, Karen's most loyal ally, was the first to crack. "I had no idea about the fire marshal's requirements," she insisted, voice shaking. "Karen assured us everything was in compliance. We trusted her as president. Yet board minutes show you voted to approve security procedures that explicitly required verification of emergency vehicles, countered Tom Kelly, reading from documents we'd obtained through discovery. And you personally denied Rose Hernandez's complaint after her husband's stroke was delayed by these same procedures. Linda's composure crumbled entirely. Karen convinced us it was necessary. She said without strict security protocols, our property values would plummet. Everything was always about property values with her. As accusations flew between board members, each trying to distance themselves from Karen's decisions, the community watched their leadership disintegrate in real time. Years of deference to Karen's authority had created a board that had abdicated its oversight responsibilities. Richard finally managed to restore order. Clearly, we need to consider a settlement with the Jensen family and implement immediate changes to our emergency access procedures. It's not just about us anymore, I responded, standing to address the room. This is about systemic failures that put lives at risk. Any resolution needs to include comprehensive reforms. The next morning, a team of independent safety auditors arrived to conduct a thorough assessment of Oakwood Estates' emergency procedures. Hired by the county as part of its broader investigation, they gained access to areas and documents previously shielded from community members. Their findings, released 3 days later, were damning. Beyond the gate access issues, they identified multiple safety violations: fire lanes blocked by decorative landscaping, emergency water access points concealed by unauthorized modifications, and evacuation routes that failed to meet current codes. Most disturbing was evidence that Karen and select board members had repeatedly overruled their own security company's recommendations for emergency vehicle access, insisting on aesthetically appropriate solutions that prioritized appearance over function. As these revelations became public, the county prosecutor's office announced they were reviewing potential criminal charges against Karen for obstruction of emergency services and falsification of official documents. The legal consequences she had avoided in our settlement were returning through official channels. The pressure on the remaining board members intensified. Residents who had once feared Karen's retaliation now spoke freely at community meetings, sharing years of accumulated grievances. The board, desperate to save their positions and limit their liability, scrambled to implement reforms. Too little, too late, Sarah commented, as we watched them unveil a new emergency access system that should have been installed years ago. They had the power to prevent what happened to Maddie all along. The tipping point came when the county announced public hearings on emergency access regulations for all gated communities, with Oakwood Estates as their primary case study. The board's failures would now be documented in public record, potentially affecting their professional reputations beyond the community. That evening, we received a call from Richard Winters. "Jensen, we want to present a comprehensive settlement offer at tomorrow's community meeting," he said, his voice heavy with defeat. "The remaining board members will resign, allowing for new elections. The HOA will cover all of Madison's medical expenses and establish a safety compliance fund, and we'll implement every recommendation from the safety audit, regardless of cost." "And the violation notices?" I asked, referring to the retaliatory citations Karen's allies had continued issuing to our supporters. "All dismissed, retroactively," he promised. "We just want to resolve this before the county hearings." The community, meeting the next evening, had the atmosphere of a reckoning long deferred. The board members sat ashen-faced as their settlement offer was presented, followed by their collective resignations. When Richard opened the floor for community response, Rose Hernandez was the first to speak. "For years, we lived under rules, applied unfairly and enforced through fear," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "My Roberto suffered permanent damage because of delayed emergency care, and I was too afraid to fight it. Thank you, Jensen family, for having the courage we lacked." Others followed, sharing stories of Karen's selective enforcement, of board indifference to legitimate concerns, of a community governance system that had prioritized control over compassion. Watching these testimonies, I felt a complex mixture of vindication and sadness. The system had failed my daughter, but it had been failing this community long before we arrived. As the meeting concluded with the appointment of an interim board tasked with organizing new elections, Battalion Chief Rivera approached me with unexpected news. "The county is implementing what they're calling Madison's Protocol," she explained. "It's a standardized emergency vehicle access requirement for all gated and controlled access communities. No verification, no delays, no exceptions." "They named it after my daughter?" I asked, genuinely surprised. She nodded. "Sometimes it takes a specific case to change systemic problems." Madison's story resonated with officials in a way abstract arguments about safety never could. That night, as I shared this news with Sarah, she reflected on how far we'd come from that terrifying day at the soccer field. "When this started, all I wanted was for Karen to be held accountable," she said quietly. "I never imagined it would lead to changes that might save other lives." "That's how systems change," I replied. "One person stands up, then another, until the broken parts can't be ignored anymore." As if to underscore this point, my email pinged with a message from an unfamiliar address. It was from Karen's husband, Howard. "I thought you should know," he wrote. "Karen is selling her house and moving out of state. The community she once controlled no longer wants her, and she finally understands she can't fight this anymore. I'm releasing all security system maintenance contracts with Oakwood Estates, with no early termination penalties. It's the least I can do." The reckoning had come at last, not just for Karen, but for a system that had enabled her, a board that had empowered her, and a community that had feared her. The power structure that had nearly cost my daughter her life was dismantled, piece by piece, exposed to the light of public scrutiny and community action. As I checked on Maddie before bed, finding her sleeping peacefully without the oxygen assistance she'd needed since the incident, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us here. What began in terror at a soccer field had transformed into a movement for accountability and safety that extended far beyond our family or even Oakwood Estates. The reckoning wasn't just about punishment for past wrongs. It was about creating systems that valued lives over rules, people over procedures, compassion over control. And in that sense, despite all we'd endured, something good had emerged from our darkest moment. 6 months after Karen blocked the ambulance from reaching Maddie, Oakwood Estates held a community gathering in our newly redesigned common area. Gone were the ornamental gates that had once prioritized aesthetics over safety. In their place stood a streamlined entry system with dedicated emergency lanes and automated access for first responders. Madison's Protocol signs marked the entrance, a daily reminder of what our community had learned through painful experience. The name had spread beyond our neighborhood, now a county-wide standard for emergency access in all gated communities and increasingly being adopted by municipalities across the state. As residents mingled on that warm Saturday afternoon, it was difficult to reconcile this vibrant, engaged community with the fearful, divided neighborhood we'd encountered upon moving in. Children played freely on lawns that once would have triggered violation notices. Neighbors chatted across property, lines without anxiously checking for patrol cars or documenting cameras. "Dad, come see," Maddie called, waving me over to where she stood with a group of teenagers and emergency services personnel. At 17, she had fully recovered physically from her anaphylactic reaction, though she still carried 2 EpiPens everywhere and approached any new food with careful consideration. The psychological recovery had been more complicated. For months after the incident, she'd had nightmares about not being able to breathe, about help being kept away by faceless figures. But rather than letting the trauma define her, Maddie had transformed it into purpose. I approached to find her, demonstrating proper EpiPen technique to a group of neighbors while a paramedic supervised. She had become an unlikely advocate, working with local schools and community organizations to improve awareness of severe allergies and emergency response. "Remember," she explained, with the confidence of someone who understood the stakes personally. "Blue to the sky, orange to the thigh, and hold for 3 seconds. Nearby, Sarah chatted with Rose Hernandez and other members of the new Community Safety Committee, a group created after the incident to ensure oversight of emergency procedures and accessibility issues. The committee, with its mix of young, Families, seniors, and those with medical needs represented a fundamental shift in Oakwood Estate's governance priorities. Michael, Tom Kelly waved me over to where he stood with Battalion Chief Rivera and several county officials. We were just discussing the impact of Madison's protocol on response times. Chief Rivera nodded. Average emergency response in gated communities has improved by nearly 4 minutes county-wide. Those are life-saving numbers. The state legislature is considering adopting the standards next session, added a county supervisor. Your daughter's experience could help save lives across the entire state. I felt a complex mixture of pride and lingering sadness. No parent wants their child's trauma to become a cautionary tale, but knowing some good had emerged from our ordeal offered a measure of healing. The physical transformation of Oakwood Estates was striking, but the cultural change ran deeper. The new board, elected in a record turnout vote 2 months after the mass resignations, operated with unprecedented transparency. Meetings were live-streamed. Financial records were accessible to all residents. Enforcement of community standards had been completely reimagined, focusing on safety and support rather than punishment and control. Karen Wilson was long gone, having sold her house at a loss and moved out of state. Most of her allies had followed, unable to adjust to the community's new direction or face their neighbors after the full extent of their enabling behavior came to light. The security company owned by Karen's husband had been replaced with a firm specializing in emergency access systems, selected through a transparent bidding process. The legal aftermath had resolved more smoothly than expected. Our settlement with the HOA included not just compensation for Maddie's medical expenses, but funding for community-wide emergency response training and the installation of AED units throughout the neighborhood. The county prosecutor had ultimately declined to file criminal charges against Karen, determining that the civil consequences and community reforms represented sufficient accountability. "You know what's really changed?" Dylan observed as we walked home that evening. "People actually talk to each other now. Nobody's afraid anymore." He was right. The social climate had transformed from one of surveillance and fear to one of connection and mutual support. Neighbors who had once documented each other's violations now looked out for each other's well-being instead. That night, as our family gathered for dinner, Maddie raised her glass of water in an impromptu toast. "To silver linings," she said with the wisdom that comes only through adversity. "Two silver linings," we echoed, understanding the complex sentiment behind her simple words. Later, as Sarah and I sat on the porch watching the sunset over our transformed community, she took my hand. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd just paid those first violation notices, if we'd just tried to fly under Karen's radar?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "But I think systems like that one eventually collapse under their own weight. Someone would have challenged it eventually." "I'm glad it was us," she said after a thoughtful pause. "Not because of what Maddie went through, I'd give anything to undo that, but because we had the resources and knowledge to fight back. Not everyone does." She was right. Our professional backgrounds, financial stability, and understanding of legal systems had equipped us to challenge a broken system in ways many others couldn't. That privilege had come with responsibility, not just to seek justice for our daughter, but to ensure the changes benefited the entire community. As darkness fell over Oakwood Estates, emergency vehicles responded to a call several streets over. We watched as they moved smoothly through the redesigned entrance. No delays, no questions, no clipboards demanding authorization. Just rapid response to human need, exactly as it should be. The ambulance's lights disappeared around a corner, and I said a silent prayer for whoever needed help tonight. They would receive it without the delay that had endangered my daughter's life. A small victory, perhaps, in the grand scheme of things, but one that meant everything to whoever waited for those flashing lights. Sometimes that's how progress happens, not through sweeping revolutions, but through one family refusing to accept that rules matter more than lives, one community finding its voice after years of silent compliance, one system changing because its failures became too obvious to ignore, and, in that sense, despite all we had endured, the resolution had brought something precious, the knowledge that Maddie's suffering had not been in vain. that other families would be spared what ours had faced because we had refused to stay silent. That, in the end, was a resolution we could live with.